How Western media frames queer Africa, and why it matters. There is a familiar rhythm to how stories about queer life in Africa reach global audiences. They usually arrive suddenly, often during moments of tension. Sometimes through dramatic headlines or brief clips that move quickly across screens. The tone is urgent, the language is sharp, the message feels clear. Something is happening, and it is serious. But urgency has a way of simplifying stories. Over time, a pattern emerges. Queer Africa appears most often as a problem to be explained, a crisis to be addressed, or a danger to be avoided. The focus is rarely on daily life, personal nuance, or the ordinary rhythms that make up most human experience. Instead, the story is compressed into moments that travel well, moments that fit neatly into existing expectations. This is not necessarily the result of bad intentions. Media operates under constraints: time, attention, competition, and audience familiarity. Stories must be legible quickly. They must make sense within frames viewers already recognize. And those frames often come preloaded. When Western audiences encounter stories about Africa, they are often encountering them through inherited narratives, stories shaped long before the first headline appears. These narratives influence what feels important, what feels surprising, and what feels worth repeating. And this is where framing begins to matter. Framing is not just about what is said. It is about what is emphasized, what is omitted, and what is assumed to be understood without explanation. It shapes how viewers interpret information before they even realize they're interpreting it. In coverage of queer Africa, framing often centers on extremes. Danger is foregrounded. Conflict becomes the primary lens. Queer people are introduced at the point of risk, not at the point of living. This creates a narrow emotional range. Viewers are invited to feel alarm, pity, or outrage, but rarely familiarity. As a result, queer Africans are often presented as figures within a story, rather than authors of their own lives. Their existence becomes symbolic, standing in for broader ideas about progress, tradition, or global difference. Individual voices are included, but frequently within tight boundaries set by the narrative itself. The story is not about who they are, it is about what they represent. This framing has consequences. When queer African life is repeatedly shown only through moments of danger, it reinforces the idea that safety exists elsewhere. When joy, humor, love, routine, and community are absent from the picture, viewers are left with an incomplete understanding, one that subtly positions queerness as incompatible with African normalcy. But normalcy is precisely where most lives unfold. Most queer Africans are not living inside headlines. They are navigating relationships, family expectations, work responsibilities, faith commitments, and personal aspirations. They experience tension, yes, but also laughter, boredom, ambition, creativity, and care. These dimensions rarely make it into international coverage, not because they do not exist, but because they are harder to frame as urgent. Media, by its nature, privileges the exceptional over the everyday. This tendency is not unique to Africa. However, when combined with long-standing global perceptions, it produces a particular effect. Western societies are often allowed complexity. African societies are often reduced to explanation. When something troubling happens in a Western country, coverage often situates it within a broader context. Viewers are reminded that societies contain contradictions, debates, and internal disagreements. But when similar tensions appear in African contexts, they are more likely to be framed as reflections of culture itself, rather than as moments within it. This distinction shapes interpretation. One narrative suggests a society wrestling with change. The other suggests a society defined by resistance to it. Over time, repetition solidifies perception. Audiences begin to expect certain kinds of stories and stop noticing what is missing. The absence of everyday representation becomes normal. Silence fills the gaps. Another important aspect of framing is voice. In many stories about queer Africa, voices from outside the continent are given explanatory authority. Analysts, advocates, or commentators provide context, interpretation, and conclusions. Local voices are often included, but primarily as testimony rather than perspective. This distinction matters. Testimony answers the question, what happened to you? Perspective answers the question, how do you understand your life? When queer Africans appear only as witnesses to harm, their agency is subtly reduced. They are present, but not centered. Their insights into culture, community, and personal navigation are often secondary to interpretations offered elsewhere. This imbalance does not require malice to exist. It emerges naturally when stories are produced far from the places they describe, for audiences unfamiliar with local nuance. But its effects are real. It shapes how viewers imagine queer African futures. If the only visible future is escape, then staying appears irrational. If the only visible emotion is fear, then resilience appears improbable. If the only visible outcome is danger, then complexity disappears. Yet many queer Africans choose to stay, not because they are unaware of risk, but because life is more than safety alone. It is family, it is language, it is memory. It is belonging that cannot be replicated elsewhere. These realities are difficult to capture in short-form reporting. There is also the issue of visibility itself. Western media often assumes that visibility is universally desirable. Being seen, named, and recognized is treated as the ultimate goal. But visibility is not neutral. It carries different meanings in different contexts. For some, visibility brings affirmation. For others, it brings scrutiny. For many, it brings both at the same time.